have confidence in the Morrison government in going net zero in emissions by 2050? And what do you think that impact that will have on the Isaac region?
Well, Anne Baker, let me go to you first on this. You are the Mayor of the Isaac Regional Council. You're a Labor Party member, but I understand you describe yourself as an equal opportunity critic of both major parties here. So the question is, well, do you think Australia should be committing to net zero by 2050? And what would it mean for the coal community that you represent?
Look, what I think is, should there be a target? There absolutely should be a target set. And we need a target set to enable to open up this conversation about forming good, balanced policy. There is going to be an impact, and we need to clearly understand what that is and how it's going to be delivered.
And when you say there should be when you say there should be a target, just to be clear, do you think there should be a net zero by 2050 target?
I don't believe I'm informed enough, and I'm not a scientist about making up the methodologies of what that target should be. What I absolutely support, and I believe the majority of my region supports, the setting of a target.
Okay, but you're unsure as to what that target should be.
Absolutely, it's not for me. I'm not a scientist,
okay,
and I'm not going to pretend.
No, fair enough. But do you understand what a net zero by 2050 target might mean for the coal workers in your community? Are you aware of what that may mean for them?
Yeah, I am absolutely aware that there's a high level of frustration. There's a high level of confusion. What I am very confident about is that we have been at the coalface of coal mining for well over a century. We are living and breathing approvals around mining leases that are currently happening every week of my working life. We are living and breathing current approvals of mining projects that are being approved and conditioned for a 75-year life. So there is life in the coal mining industry into the future. What we need to be included in, from my perspective, is an inclusive conversation about a balance of energy. My region is currently running on a coexistent model. We have coal projects with neighbours of solar farms. We've got coal projects with neighbours as wind farms. We've got cattle farms. So we are living and breathing a coexistent model as we speak.
Well, it's good to have you as part of this conversation tonight. Let's bounce it around some of the others here. Tim Wilson, let's just start with a bit of clarity on your position. Do you want the government to support net zero by 2050?
Well, I do, with a plan, and this has always been one of the differentiators. There are a lot of political parties out there who say they want the moniker or the intent of net zero by 2050, and the Prime Minister's been very clear, and I agree with him very clearly, that to give exactly the sort of confidence that we've just heard, we want a plan that isn't just, yes, it's about the environment, but it's also about the economy and jobs to steward the whole nation forward. And that's the conversation that's happening in Parliament right now, where we have people representing rural and regional communities who may, in some cases, experience disproportionate impacts, and how we help them transition. And when we talk about the communities like the one we're talking about, there are obviously investments in transition away from coal towards gas, which has a lower emissions footprint, and increasingly we want to see that as a destination for investment for things like hydrogen. So we're not just talking about coal being a critical part of Australia's past, a necessary part of Australia's future, but also a diminishing share of Australia's future energy, but how we're actually going to add new sectors and new investment to grow the jobs in those communities so we take the whole of Australia with us.
And we'll come to some of those transition issues, but again, I just want to clear up your position here. You've presumably seen the government's plan. You're the Assistant Minister. Do you support it, and do you support net zero by 2050?
Oh, resolutely, with a plan I do.
With a plan or with the plan that the government has on the table?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that. Could you repeat the question?
With a plan, or do you actually support the plan?
Oh, no, I support the plan. There is no dispute about that. The principles which underpins it is very clearly focused on the role of technology to create new investment, new jobs, so that Australia responds to changing market demand, that creates an environment for jobs in new technology sectors and, of course, cleaner energy, while also making sure we offset the emissions of existing things like fossil fuels and the like. And so it's about taking everyone with us as part of a national conversation. And I think that fundamental principle is very exciting.
And does this plan that you are supporting come at a cost to regions like Anne's or not?
Well, there's an acknowledgement that there are adjustments that are made in different parts of the country where you've got traditional sectors like coal in some communities. As I said, there's changing market demand globally. It's not just being driven by what's happening domestically in Australia. Sure. And so there will be a change from what's demanded by the rest of the world, and in part the plan is focused on what can we do to support those communities through that adjustment, and how do we lead the investment and create the investment so that the skills, the value and of course the community that exists and the identity that exists in those communities is conserved, but frankly thrives.
So what's the plan mean for Anne and for her community?
Well, I said that before. I mean, we've seen a transition away from coal towards other types of technologies, including the role of gas. Now, the gas is not the final solution, but it's a transition fuel on the way through to the use of cleaner hydrogen. And, of course, there's investments in looking at things like hydrogen hubs in communities exactly like this, so that they can become exporters of the fuels of a net zero world, so Australia can thrive and support its community. And, of course, with jobs that people are rightly proud of.
Well, and I'll come back. Well, let's get a reaction to you. The hydrogen, gas, sounds like there'll be new jobs there. Is that an adequate level of comfort for you and the workers you represent?
Oh, look, we're full with frustration, to be frank. What I think needs to be really put on the table here is to be very clear about the quality of coal that is in the Bowen Basin. We are sitting on the world-class metallurgical coal that delivers steel. At the moment, as we sit on this panel tonight, there is no other answer to to steel. It's metallurgical coal that is absolutely needed, world-class. The other type of coal is thermal coal, which delivers electricity. Our frustration in this conversation that we, quite frankly, have not been included in, we've got no vision over any plan, and I struggle to understand how the plan can be written when a target has not been set, and when communities and regions like the one that I lead have not been included in any of this plan, with any of these plans or the targets.
Well, and none of us have seen the details of this plan that Tim Wilson's talking about yet.
Can I just add to that?
David, can I just make one more point?
Yes.
That in our part of the world also, we don't use the word transition. We use the word transformation. Transitioning clearly describes you're moving away from something. And there is no replacement, as we sit here tonight, for metallurgical coal producing.
Okay. Simon, I can see you shaking your head throughout a lot of this. So let me come to you, and perhaps we need to explain to viewers what Climate 200, your group, is all about. You're trying to unseat a number of Liberals like Tim Wilson with independent candidates. Why?
Yeah, well, more than that, we are at the beginning of the most amazing transformation in Australia's political system. Communities around the country that have become disengaged from the political system, that are tired of the inaction on climate change. They're tired of the corruption that we see in Canberra, and frankly, incredible number of people in the movement are frustrated with the government's inability to address the treatment and safety of women in Australia. That particular issue. Communities across the country have stepped forward with community campaigns inspired by the Helen Hayneses in Indi and Zali Steggall and many other strong community independents before. And they're putting a new model forward, MPs that are accountable absolutely accountable to their communities. They're not spending every minute of the day trying to work their way up the political ladder. They're not beholden to the party machines. They're not worried about their donors. They're absolutely committed to the community, and we're seeing them do fantastic stuff in Parliament. But can I just say, in this conversation about net zero, this is so frustrating. You don't get a prize for net zero, announcing net zero. When Tony Abbott signed Australia up to the Paris Agreement in 2015, he signed Australia up for a net zero target back then. New South Wales and Victoria signed on to net zero in 2016. Every state and territory in Australia has a net zero target. Australia has a net zero target right now. So this is an absolute distraction. We're talking about it because Morrison's about to go to Glasgow with nothing more than Tony Abbott's re-warmed up homework from 2015. We're going to be an absolute embarrassment when we get there. Australia, what is Glasgow about? It's not about net zero. Glasgow is about the Paris Agreement, and the Paris Agreement is about keeping global warming to less than 2 degrees, well less than the 2 degrees, preferably 1.5. And if we don't manage to do that, we may as well say goodbye to the reef. The unprecedented fire events that we've had recently will become every other year, and large parts of Australia will become both uninsurable and unlivable. So, Glasgow is about the Paris Agreement, not about net zero.
So if that's the case, that it's not about net zero by 2050, it's about 2030, why aren't you supporting candidates to run against Labor MPs? Because they don't have a 2030 target either.
So we're not starting campaigns and we're not choosing candidates. What we're doing is identifying the campaigns around the country that are strongest. And I was on a Zoom call earlier this year. 300 people from 72 electorates turned up to a conference that Cathy McGowan, the former member for Indi, organised. And they heard about all the skills required and what they would need to do in order to get this model going. About 30 of those communities have really strong efforts, and it's unsurprising that the strongest efforts are in the communities most frustrated, and they're frustrated with members that don't represent them. The candidate that's been chosen by North Sydney to run against Trent Zimmerman, Kylie Tink, she said that she's voted Liberal every election of her life, but she doesn't recognise the party, and the party doesn't recognise her. When Morrison said that climate policy wouldn't be settled in the inner city wine bars and the dinner parties in Sydney, he was talking about her and her future constituents.
So at the moment it's only Liberals you're trying to turf out through this campaign, but you're not ruling out.
No, absolutely not. Not ruling out. When strong community campaigns run, regardless of these are communities that are running against the party machines. Okay,
Chris Bowen, let me come to you then on this. If it's not about net zero by 2050. If this Glasgow summit is all about 2030, what is Labor offering?
Well, I'll answer that, David, but firstly let me deal with the question raised by our viewer, and a very good question. And firstly about confidence, I have no confidence in the Morrison government. Here we are after 423 weeks in office, 2 weeks before Glasgow, and Tim can't tell us what the official policy of the government is in relation to net zero. After 70,000 hours in office, they need some more 4-hour meetings. This is the global warming, climate change is the biggest challenge facing the planet and the biggest economic opportunity facing the country, and the government of the country doesn't have a policy. On the regions, and the question was about how the regions are impacted, I've got good news. The regions will be at the heart of the transformation to net zero, and the quicker that transformation occurs, the better for the regions. The key to dealing with climate change is to electrify everything and to make that electricity renewable. And that electricity is going to be made in the regions. We're going to need much more electricity, and that's going to be made in the regions, not just because they've got the space for the big renewable installations, because they've got the skills that have powered Australia for so long in traditional energy are the same skills that will power us in our renewable economy. And we saw the BCA modelling just last week, which said Australians will be much better off with net zero, but Australians in regional Australia will be 3 times better off on average than Australians in the capital cities, because that's where the great transformation will occur. Now, on the medium-term targets, Simon's 100% right. You shouldn't get a prize for declaring net zero. The Labor Party's been committed to it for years. It shouldn't be a matter of bipartisan dispute. The fact that I can come on here and say it is a matter of bipartisan difference is an indictment on the government of Australia. But 2050 is not enough. What will really determine whether we can hold the world to 1.5 degrees over the next decade is what happens, 1.5 degrees warming is what happens over the next decade. And that's why medium-term targets are so important. That's why the government should be increasing its medium-term target at Glasgow. They're saying they're not going to. It is Tony Abbott's target. Tony Abbott is a climate change denier, and it was designed explicitly to match the United States. And the United States...
We might come back to the 2030
target.
target. We will come back to the 2030 target, but Amelia, let me bring you in here. You heard Anne talk about how coal workers, she feels, have been forgotten a lot in this debate. You represent young Indigenous Australians who want more action on climate change. Have they also been forgotten, do you think, in this debate?
Absolutely. I think whether it's, mining communities, First Nations communities, farmers, particularly First Nations communities though, we are being left behind. And my heart goes out to, to mining communities who've paid a really heavy price. If we could do anything, and the same applies to really any issue, is involving communities who are most impacted by issues in building solutions, building the plans for the way forward. I think for our mob, what's not being talked about here in terms of, conversations about leadership and the political football of climate change is the problem that we have with politics right now, and the fact that big corporations, oil and gas corporations, are holding our politicians back from taking urgent action on climate change. And, you're talking about 2050. 2050 is going to be too late. Last year, half the country was on fire. There's communities who are running out of water. There's places that are going to become unlivable. It's going to be far too late, and the action that we need to see needs to be this decade. And when you talk about leadership, if you're not prepared to step up to the game, if you don't know what leadership looks like, then honestly get out of the way and let First Nations people, first people of this country who've been looking after this land sustainably for tens of thousands of years, step back and let us stand up, because we know what to do in a crisis. We know what to do. It's time for you to follow our lead.